Today, we're diving into what might be the single biggest misunderstanding in digital marketing, something I like to call the last-click deception. We're going to unpack how to unlock a whole new level of revenue simply by changing the way we measure success. All right, so let's just get right into it. For years, we've been obsessed with this one idea, the last click. It's clean, it's simple, it fits perfectly in a spreadsheet. We've built entire careers and marketing budgets around the belief that the very last thing a customer does before they buy is the only thing that really matters. But here's the hard truth. It's a lie. A convenient one maybe, but a lie that's costing businesses a fortune. And this is the question that flips the entire script. What if that final click isn't the hero of the story? What if it's just the final handshake after a really long, thoughtful conversation? Think about it. What if the real work, building trust, creating that sense of familiarity, proving you're the right choice, what if all of that happens in the 5 or 7 or even 9 steps before that final click? That's the complex reality we're going to map out today. So here's our game plan. First, we'll pull back the curtain on the last click deception itself. Then we'll talk about the multi-channel crisis that made this old model totally obsolete. From there, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the solution, the fractional credit engine, and even touch on the psychology of why it works so well. Finally, we'll walk through a framework to put it all to work, so you can fund your entire growth story, not just the last page. Okay, so let's start with this core conflict. Relying on the last click is kind of like trying to understand an epic movie by only watching the final 2 minutes. Sure, you see how it ends, but you have absolutely no clue how the characters got there, what they went through, or why that ending even matters. And in business, making huge budget decisions based on just that last scene is a very, very expensive mistake. Because look, when you give 100% of the credit to that final click, which is usually a branded search or a direct link, you're effectively telling your organization that nothing else mattered. That podcast ad that first put you on their radar? Worthless, apparently. The super helpful blog post that answered their biggest question? Nope, zero value. That social media campaign that built familiarity over weeks? Just a cost. By obsessing over the climax, we systematically starve the very channels that build the trust that makes that climax possible in the first place. So you're probably wondering, how did we even get into this mess? Why did a model that seemed so logical for so long become so dangerously outdated? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The customer journey has completely changed. The old map just doesn't work anymore. And this slide, it lays it all out, doesn't it? 2 totally different worlds. On the left, you've got last click. It's simple, it's clean, but it's deceptive. It pretends the journey is a straight line. And on the right, you've got multi-touch attribution. Yeah, it's more complex, for sure, but that's because reality is complex. It's designed to actually reflect the messy, winding path your customers really take, and it gives credit where credit is due. Because this is what the journey actually looks like now. It's not a straight line. Someone might hear about you on a podcast, forget your name, then see an ad on social media a week later. They click, they browse, they leave. Then they might get an email, see a review on Google, and then, finally, weeks later, they type your name in and buy. If you can't see that whole picture, how on earth can you predict their lifetime value? You can't. You're just flying blind. So this brings us to the solution, Multi-Touch Attribution, or MTA. You can think of it like upgrading from a crumpled old treasure map to a high-resolution satellite map of your entire business. It's a system designed to track and measure every single one of those touchpoints, showing you exactly how your marketing dollars are working together to bring in revenue. So how does this engine actually work? Well, it breaks down into 3 pretty powerful steps. First, you've got to aggregate the data, basically connecting all those dots from social media, email, and your website to one single person. Second, and this is where the magic really happens, is credit weighting. Instead of giving 100% of the credit to that last click, we use a model to give a fraction of the credit to every touchpoint that played a part. And third, that's the payoff, strategic reallocation. You can finally move your budget with confidence, funding what actually works, not just what looks good on a misleading report. Now, how we assign that credit, that's where it gets really clever. One of the most effective ways to start is with something called the U-shaped model. The logic here is just beautiful in its simplicity. It recognizes that in any journey, 2 moments are more important than all the others. The very first time someone ever heard of you and the moment they finally decided to buy. So what does this look like? Well, in a typical U-shaped model, that first touch point, let's say it was a YouTube ad, bam, it gets 40% of the credit for the sale. The last touch point, that branded Google search, also gets 40% of the credit. And that crucial 20% in the middle, that gets spread across all the other things, like the email newsletter and the blog post that kept the conversation alive. For the first time ever, your awareness channels get the real credit and the budget they've always deserved. But here's the thing. This isn't just about numbers and spreadsheets. The reason a system like MTA works so incredibly well is because it finally syncs up your budget with how people, actual humans, make decisions. It forces you to invest in the slow, steady, and deeply human process of building trust. And it all starts with a simple psychological principle, the mere exposure effect. All it means is that we tend to like things more when they're familiar. It's human nature. Nobody makes a big purchase from a complete stranger on the first go. They need to see you, hear from you, and recognize you over and over again. That's why those 6 to 10 touch points aren't just nice to have. They're absolutely critical for building the familiarity that leads to a sale. The second big idea is consistency. People need to hear the same coherent story from you everywhere they see you. If your social media is all fun and games, but your emails are stiff and corporate, you're not building a relationship, you're just creating confusion. By mapping the whole journey, MTA helps you see where your story is breaking down so you can present a consistent, credible brand at every single step. Okay, theory is great, right? But how do you actually make all this happen? How do you take these ideas and put them into practice in your own organization? It really boils down to 3 big moves. First, you have to make the decision to ditch the last click. Period. Adopt a multi-touch model, like the U-shaped one, as your new source of truth. Second, do the homework. Map out the typical 6 to 10 step journey your best customers take. And third, and this is the real game changer, optimize the first touch. You need to intentionally shift your time, energy, and budget upstream to make that first impression count. And let's just pause on this number again for a moment. 6 to 10. This isn't just some marketing fluff. This is the observed reality of how people buy things today. Every one of those interactions is another brick in the foundation of trust. Trying to build a business by only funding that final interaction, it's like building a skyscraper, but only paying for the penthouse suite. The whole thing is going to collapse because there's no foundation holding it up. So this all leads us to a new law of the land, really. A new rule for how you should think about growth. To succeed in the long run, you can't just fund the final moment of conversion. You have to fund the entire story. So if you take one thing away today, let it be this. Multi-touch attribution is so much more than a measurement tool. It's a way of thinking that puts your customer's real, complex journey right at the center of your financial strategy. It's about finally admitting that a sale isn't just a transaction. It's the result of a relationship you've built over time.
At the end of the day, it's about a fundamental shift. You stop trying to shove people through some rigid artificial funnel. Instead, you focus on pulling them toward you with real value and a great experience, all while knowing you have a financial system that actually rewards you for doing it. You can finally afford to fund the entire story, from the very first chapter all the way to the end.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. Your budget tells a story about what you value. Right now, is it a story about short-term wins, obsessed with only the last page? Or is it a story of long-term vision, one that invests in building real trust from the very first chapter? The choice is yours.